Okay. And so join that breakout room. Join room 1. So Kang Tong-un, Oun Tech, and UJE, please join this group. And tell me if this is how you feel about this statement, that this is really what the European Union, as an instrument for peace, as a tool for peace, this is really all it counts for. It basically, it institutionalizes crises so that it slows the pace of events down, to give people more time to talk to each other and communicate with each other, the leaders of parties in conflict to talk to each other if they want to. So please join the group. And who's going to speak for the group? So I'm going to flip a coin. Heads. It is the first person. So let me see if I can do this. Okay. And it is heads. And so that person is Kang Tong-un. So Kang Tong-un is going to speak for the group. And I'm going to vote as well. And so heads, I'm 1, 2, or 3. And it is tails. Heads, I'm 4. And it is heads. So I disagree. I disagree. So why do I disagree? Okay, well, I have to explain why I disagree. So I'm going to write my statement, help Kang Tong-un come up with her statement, and I'm going to write my statement, disagree, on the whiteboard. again, like I keep repeating, one of the reasons why I like to do these kinds of exercises is because really forces me to think through my assumptions. And so I was forced to write a disagree statement, and I may have learned something from that. So let me, I have to close the breakout room and close the breakout room. So you have 60 seconds. And Kang Tong-un will speak. Okay, I guess it's done. All right, so Kang Tong-un, turn on your microphone and please turn on your camera. Kang Tong-un.
Okay.
Let us see your face. Turn on your camera too. I'm lonely. I want to see people. Nobody is here. I want to see faces of people. Please turn on your camera, Kang Tong-un.
Okay.
Turn on your camera.
Okay,
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so where does your group fit on this scale?
When I think about the question, it's difficult for me. Yeah.
Do you think that? Well, let me show you what I wrote. I wrote this, and I was forced to write this. I mean, I like to criticize. Everybody likes to criticize, including professors, right? And so, you know, I've been critical of the United States, and I've been critical of the Cold War, and I've been critical of the European Union because of its close alliance with the United States during the Cold War. But then I wrote this statement for disagree, right? I wrote, disagree. The function of the European Union as a peace strategy is also to contain the Putin government in Russia, which aims to recreate the Russian Empire that it lost with the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991, 30 years ago. Moscow today wants again to, in effect, to subjugate, to control and dominate Ukrainians, Kazakhs, Turkmen, Uzbeks, Belarusians, and maybe also Estonians and Latvians and Lithuanians who are part of the European Union. It wants to subjugate the nations that were in the modern version of the Russian Empire, that is the USSR, the old Soviet Union. Even if Moscow collectively perceives threat from Washington, it sees a threat to what the threat it sees is to its imperial glory. That Russia wants to do the bad things that America is doing. Even if America is building an empire and controls a de facto empire, not a real empire, but in 2021, states don't have empires, but they have spheres of influence. And America dominates Latin America, and America tried to dominate Afghanistan, and America still dominates Iraq. And those are bad things, you might say. But Russia wants to do the same bad things that the Americans are doing. And just because if you believe the Americans are doing bad things doesn't mean the Russians should also do bad things. Particularly when we're talking about the subjugation and humiliation of the peoples of the free nations that emerged from the old Soviet Union. Remember, the old Soviet Union, only 50% of the population of the old, I don't really need this, only 50% of the population of the old Soviet Union was Russian, right? The other 50% were Ukrainians, Belarusians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Georgians, Armenians, and so on. And now I feel naked, so I'm gonna put this back on. should always keep my mask on when I'm outside, even if there's nobody here. Put my mask back on. So even if the United States has an empire, doesn't mean that Russia should also have an empire. And by the way, the Russian empire, the Russian state is not a very nice place. Russia is incredibly corrupt. You can buy and sell anything in Russia. Perhaps Ukraine is just as corrupt as Russia. And what's the solution for Ukrainian patriots, Ukrainian nationalists who want their country to be prosperous and democratic? They want to fix their country. They want to repair Ukraine. And what's the blueprint? What's the plan? Joining the European Union. The acquis communautaire is the plan for fixing your country after hundreds of years of Russian and then Soviet communist domination. You want to fix your country? You want to improve your country? Yeah, you want to join the European Union because the European Union fights corruption. The European Union promotes the rule of law. The European Union promotes reform. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Or do you have to stay in the Russian sphere of influence, in Moscow's sphere of influence, which is basically is a big mafia state, a big organized crime state, with police using their powers to coerce people, to gain bribes from people, to suppress people so they cannot have genuine democracy? Is that what Ukraine must submit to? No. Ukrainian patriots, particularly young people like you, they want to fix their country. They want to improve their country. And what's the plan to do that? European integration. The same way Bulgarian patriots want to improve their country, and Polish patriots, and Hungarian patriots. So yeah, that's part of peace as well. Part of peace is justice. You cannot separate justice from peace. You want peace, you have to have justice, which means rule of law, which means real democratic elections, things you don't have in Russia today. You don't have that in Moscow. Putin's been president leader since 1999, 22 years. He wants to stay president for the next, who knows how many years. That's what Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and they should be like that. They should accept that. No. So the European Union is not embarrassed about sending European Union officials to Kiev to encourage the people there to support European integration. So let me go back to, since we have a small class here, OUNTEC or UJE? UJE, what do you...
Professor?
Yeah.
Can I say something about that question?
Yes, you may.
I don't know my answer is the right answer for the question.
Well, there is no right answer for these questions. It's just a matter of having us talk about this, right? So don't be worried about a right answer. It's a matter of having us think. So please go ahead, ask and think.
But I think that the EU seems to be a bystander on the issue of the peace, and it seems that they should be actively participate in peace issue in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Vladimir Putin is now claiming that NATO and the United States are trying to put missiles in Ukraine, that U.S. and the West are trying to put more military resources in Ukraine. He's not talking about the FTA. I don't, all I know is from reading the newspapers, the New York Times. I mean, I have to read everything in the New York Times every day because everything is changing in the world with the COVID pandemic. It's amazing, right? But maybe Putin believed in 2014, 2015, that if Ukraine signs an FTA with the European Union, a free trade agreement, that means basically they're going to become part of NATO. It's just, you can't separate the two, right? That, again, like I said before, and this is the dominant view, not just in Russia, I think it's the dominant view throughout Eastern Europe. And this was confirmed in that conference I've been attending, right? That I'm talking to people from Eastern Europe online during that conference. They make no separation between European Union and NATO. European Union, European Union, NATO. European Union, NATO. So Putin is not saying today, I don't want an FTA between Ukraine and European Union. He's talking about that the United States wants to put missiles in Ukraine and military bases in Ukraine. But Putin began to support the violence, the war in Ukraine, and start the war in 2014 when they signed the FTA, when Ukraine moved to sign an FTA with the European Union after overthrowing the pro-Russian president who was democratically elected in Ukraine in a free and fair election, according to international observers. Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign the FTA with the European Union. The students and others rose up and protested against him and overthrew him. And that was when Putin supported the war in Eastern Ukraine, after they overthrew a democratically elected president, because that democratically elected president was pro-Russian and did not sign the FTA with the European Union. And they're saying that the fighting is increasing. So, Owen Tech, what is your view, Owen Tech?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with the opinion that nationalism begins with stereotypes. Therefore, reducing stereotypes will help break down nationalism and realize peace. However, this topic is difficult to me, so I need time to think more about and more information about this topic.
Yeah, I mean, these are not easy questions to resolve. Imagine you're George H.W. Bush in 1991, 1992. You are president of the United States, George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush. And the Soviet Union has disintegrated. Communism has fallen in Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And Poland, the new democratic leaders in Poland, the new democratic leaders in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are saying, please let us join NATO. Please, we want to join NATO. We want to be free from Russian domination. Please let us in. Please, please. We have so many people in America that have family from Poland. So many people. We want to be like you. It was George H.W. Bush supposed to say, no, you cannot join NATO because we don't want to make Russia unhappy. We don't want to encourage unhappiness in the new democratic government in Moscow under Boris Yeltsin in 1992. No, we don't want to do it. You can't join Poland. You can't, we don't want you in. What politician in America could say no to that? After all of the suffering that the Polish people had experienced since 1939, all of the horrible suffering from German and Soviet invasion, by the crimes of Stalin, the crimes of communism, the economic disaster, America and Europe were supposed to say, no, you cannot join NATO. And so, of course, they said yes, and NATO and all of these countries joined NATO just a few years later in the mid-1990s, just a few years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then they began to join the European Union after they joined NATO. So they joined NATO first in the middle of the 1990s, and then they started to join the European Union in 2004, 17 years ago. And that's the same with the Ukrainian nationalists. Please save us from this organized crime, criminal state, Russia, please. We're supposed to say, no, you have to live in the criminal empire, the mafia state empire of Moscow. Sorry. I tell you what I think is going to happen. Russia is going to break up Ukraine. They're going to take half of Ukraine and add it to Russia. And they're going to let the western part of Ukraine go, because the western part of Ukraine is where the Ukrainian nationalists are concentrated. Those people are heavily, well, not heavily, there are millions of Catholics there. Catholic Ukrainians are the core of Ukrainian nationalism. I was there at a conference 5 years ago in Lviv, not far from the border with Poland, at the Catholic University of Ukraine. Like, this is the Catholic University of Korea. It was the Catholic University of Ukraine. And that's the center. Lviv is the heart of Ukrainian nationalism. And it tends to be Catholic. And even the president of the university is an American Ukrainian Catholic bishop. He's an American Ukrainian. He spoke to us. He told us one of their professors was killed in Maidan Square in Kiev in 2014, protesting against Yanukovych. He took a bullet in the heart and was killed. One of their professors. I don't think Russia wants those people, but they want I think they're going to take half of Ukraine on the east of the river that runs through Ukraine. But that's a possibility. We'll see what happens. So, time for some participation credit. Yay, participation credit. So, how do you respond to this question? Please vote. I think you can see that. You got to make sure you can see it. So 2 people have voted, 1 more person should vote. I see only 2 voters. So Kang Tong-un and Owen Tech. What about UJE? UJE, you have to vote. UJE. All right, UJE, way to go. UJE, all right. So that's the vote. And okay, so we go back to these notes here. Yeah, we started covering these notes, and we got through a lot of it, and so I won't go through it. What about economic conflicts? Remember, your textbook was finished. This edition of the textbook was finished right when the COVID-19 pandemic was starting, and it was sent to the publisher early last year. And so it doesn't reflect the conflict between U.S. and China and the European Union as an ally of the U.S. in dealing with China. Donald Trump was still president. Donald Trump is no longer president. Is be replaced by Joe Biden, and the Biden administration is more publicly supportive of America's traditional allies, including the European Union, as well as South Korea and Japan. So the economic conflicts that Trump emphasized between European Union and United States is less emphasized by the Biden administration. The Biden administration is trying to remove or end the tariffs and barriers to trade that the Trump administration implemented with the European Union. But it's, again, because of American nationalism. It's politically very difficult for the Biden administration, for Joe Biden, to remove the tariffs and restrictions on European imports, because he does not want to make certain groups of American voters, particularly workers in the steel industry and in the aluminum industry, from voting against him in the next elections, or the Democratic Party in the next elections next year. So he's trying to remove sanctions, but it's slow. including sanctions against China, because he will be attacked by Republican adversaries as sacrificing the interests of American work. I know it's not rational. I know it's not economically wise, but we're talking about nationalism, and nationalism is about emotion. Nationalism is about stereotyping, including economic nationalism. So it goes on here, some basic information. The US and the European Union are each the biggest trading partners. Together, they account for about 50% of world gross domestic product, those two countries together, and they account for almost 1/3 of world trade flows. Keep in mind, the U.S. invests most of its money. Most U.S. businesses and corporations invest most of their money far more money in Europe than they do in Asia. So the total U.S. investment in the European Union is 3 times higher than the total U.S. investment in all of Asia, including China, South Korea, Taiwan. Total U.S. and EU investment in the U.S. is 8 times higher than EU investment in all of India and Asia combined. That's an important point to keep in mind. And all of those economic groups and factories and companies that have these investments, that made these investments, they will lobby and push the U.S. government not to have conflictual situations, conflictual relations with European Union, as well as with Asia. But again, nationalism is about emotion. It's about stereotyping and emotion. And that's more powerful for many voters than immediate concerns about how much money corporations are making. Even though tariffs and sanctions increase inflation, most people don't put a connection or clear understanding. They do not have a clear understanding of the relationship between economic laws and their well-being. Even though you and I know that sanctions and tariffs are bad because they just increase inflation at home. They hurt American consumers. But again, we're not talking about being rational. We're talking about stereotyping, nationalism, and stupidity. Nationalism equals stereotyping. The European Union and the United States, they control the 2 top world currencies, the dollar and the euro. But it seems, again, the European Union is not willing to oppose the United States domination of the world financial system when the Americans put sanctions on countries like Iran and say any European country that does business in Iran cannot use American dollars because American banks will be supporting a company that's supporting a terrorist country, Iran, and we will punish that American bank. So no American bank will do business with European companies if those companies are investing in Iran or buying products from Iran. The European Union countries, the governments of the European Union are not willing to use their political power, their political leverage to protect their companies and protect the euro and protect their companies from American sanctions. They grumble about it. Over the decades, the European Union countries have complained about America exporting its foreign policy through its economic tariffs on European companies wanting to do business in Cuba and wanting to do business in Iran and wanting to do business in Venezuela, but the governments of the French companies, of the Italian companies, of the German companies never stand up to the American government and protect their companies that will be punished by the United States. They are not willing to challenge the United States on this, even though it's very bad for example, contributing to the economic disaster in Afghanistan that's going to cause hundreds of thousands of Afghans to leave Afghanistan and again try to get into the European Union and cause all of that political hostility and crisis from immigration. If you want to keep those people in Afghanistan, the Afghanistan economy has to grow. It has to recover. But the Americans will not allow countries to do, not allow American companies to do business with the Taliban, which means nobody is doing business with the Taliban except some rogue companies in China and Russia. Okay, so and just basic information. I don't know how much to cover here. I mean, if you find this, you can read this on your own. Each U.S. and European Union are each biggest sources of foreign direct investment. The biggest source of foreign direct investment into the United States is European Union, and the biggest source of foreign direct investment in the European Union is the United States. And so it gives you some numbers here in terms of the size of this total investment. Again, about the same number of Americans work for European-owned companies as Europeans working for American-owned companies by 2004. So that's a long time ago. That's 17 years ago. Almost 4.4 million Americans work for European-owned companies headquartered in European countries, and almost 4.4 million Europeans work for American companies. And so US and European Union companies are so intertwined that they forget whether their origins are Europeans or Americans. Maybe, again, that highlights why Putin believes that NATO, European Union, NATO, European Union. Because if you sign a free trade agreement with the European Union, if you're Ukraine or Georgia or Armenia, you're basically being sucked into the American sphere of influence because of this intense economic integration between the United States and the European Union. It's just a nice way of covering up NATO and America's power with a beautiful European glove. But in that glove is the fist of the United States. Pascal Lamy is a Frenchman. According to, he was the EU Trade Commissioner in 2003. The US and European Union economic relationship define the shape of the global economy as a whole. Can China change that? They're not going to ever admit that they want to change that. But they may try through the Belt and Road Initiative. The US was the dominant partner in the US-EU relationship during the Cold War, but the rise of the European single market, along with its related economic consequences, has changed the balance. Yeah, again, but when will we see the European Union oppose American sanctions, for example, on Iran? And they won't do it. Again, this September 11, 2001 attack on the United States was a big shock to US and EU relations. And, you know, I've been focusing on these topics for 30 years. So, you know, European leaders, they, in different media and different forums and in different places and times, they make speeches about their plans for the European Union, about wanting the European Union to be a true independent actor in world affairs. But sometimes the Europeans, they receive these rude shocks, these rude experiences that illustrate to them what they might forget. And that is that the European Union is fragile. The European Union is more fragile than the leaders of European integration may assume, because these leaders, they don't talk to people like you and me most of the time. They talk to each other. They talk in a world where all the time they're thinking about the European Union. They're preparing for Council of European Union meetings. There are 16 types of Council of European Union meetings. They're preparing for European Council meetings that happen twice every 6 months between the presidents and prime ministers of the member states in Brussels. their organizations are preparing, the bureaucracies are preparing for those meetings. They're coming up. And so their world is, their day-to-day life, their day-to-day existence is heavily, heavily influenced by Europe. But among the mass of the population, there's a different kind of existence. It's a different kind of life in which Europe is not something that they immediately see and talk about all the time, the way European leaders talk about it all the time among themselves. And so they might believe that, yes, we Europeans, we can begin to restrain the United States when the United States is threatening to do something that we think is very foolish in international affairs. And so I told you the story about how in 2003, as the Americans prepared to invade Iraq, the French and the Germans, the French president and the German prime minister called upon the rest of Europe not to support the American invasion of Iraq as a mistake. It will be a terrible mistake. And none of the other countries in the European Union listened to them. None of the other European candidate countries that wanted to join the European Union listened to them. The Americans responded with those attacks in more stereotypical terms, claiming that there was a just fundamental innate hatred of the Islamists for America's way of life, where the Europeans look more at the root causes of this militant resentment against the United States and the Middle East that contributed to those terrorist attacks. They quietly complain about U.S. policy in the Arab-Israeli conflict, being too supportive of Israel, but they never punish Israel. They've never put trade sanctions on Israel, the Europeans. They say, you really shouldn't do that. That's it. They don't do anything. And then, of course, there were, in 2015, there were terrorist attacks in Paris that killed over 100 people. And those terrorists who carry out those attacks, they're on trial right now as we speak. And the trial is now underway. The attacks, of course, include the fact that eventually, when the Americans invaded Iraq anyway, the French and others tried to strengthen their relations with the United States by cooperating with the United States. So Paris sent military forces to Afghanistan and participated in fighting there. The France sent Air Force to bomb Libya in 2011. France sent Air Force to bomb the Islamic State in Iraq in 2014. And so there was a relationship to why these Islamists in France attacked France, because France was bombing and killing the enemy of the United States in those countries, because they were trying to really show their close alliance with the United States after that humiliation of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Despite European sympathetic outpourings in response to the 9/11 2001 attacks, the U.S. administration declared it was going on a crusade, war against terrorism, whatever that is. And the U.S. characterized Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as an axis of evil. Very stereotypical terms, right? And this really raised lots of concerns with the Europeans. And the Europeans called this portrayal by George W. Bush as simplistic, and that this was an unproductive way for the Americans to act in declaring a war against everybody that they declared was supporting terrorism, even making problems worse. So since the United States was defeated in Afghanistan, is that going to make Islamic militancy stronger and more appealing in the Middle East? You could point to that as a mistake. But again, the Europeans are not able to restrain the Americans because they don't want to pay the immediate political and economic price of attempting to restrain the United States. Even the Obama administration showed it was unable politically to make Israel withdraw from the occupied Palestinian territories where the Israeli government is carrying out an apartheid kind of policy towards the occupied territories. He came in, Obama, when he was elected in 2008, is very popular, but he left with much disappointment in Europe in 2016, basically because the Obama administration continued the policies of the Bush administration. And the same criticisms are being made about the Biden administration, that is continuing to put the sanctions on Iran, that the Biden administration is following the same. One description I saw in the newspaper was that the Biden administration is like the Trump administration in its Make America Great Again or America First strategy, but the Biden administration is more polite than Donald Trump and the Trump administration, which again reflects the impact of all of these big vested interests that have built up over generations, over decades, that whether it's Biden or Trump or Bush or Obama, there are still these fundamental trends of U.S. expansion and use of military force to expand its global influence. And the Europeans can see what is happening, but they can't stop it. So Trump's election represented a significant development in EU-US relations because Trump would just very openly criticize these multilateral institutions as alliances between U.S. and European Union developed into long-established institutions. Trump claimed that the Europeans and others were exploiting America, free riding on America, including the South Koreans. So the Trump administration claimed to reject multilateral, meaning it tended to reject coming up with group agreement among its allies to approach a problem. If the United States would just do it on its own, multilateral means many-sided, or more than one actor, that all actors should get together and act and decide how they're going to act before we act. And the Europeans are claiming that the Biden administration just left Afghanistan without consulting with Britain and France and Germany and the other European actors there, although the Biden administration insists that it did consult with them. But they're claiming that, again, the Biden administration just acted unilaterally. Uni means one, lateral means side. It acted on its own, they claim. Earlier, the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The Trump administration also pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear agreement with Iran. And again, the Biden administration has not gone back to the nuclear agreement with Iran. It's not gone back to it, despite Biden had been vice president when the nuclear agreement with Iran, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was negotiated under Obama administration. Trump also sought warmer relations with Russia. Trump also undermined European attempts to adopt a unified position towards Moscow. Trump also cultivated ties with President Erdogan of Turkey. So again, I mean, you just never see the Europeans playing a significant role here. It is interesting that with the Biden administration, we see the government in Moscow is increasing its military pressure on Ukraine. Maybe because the Russians believe that when Trump was president, there was more division between the European Union and the United States. But now with Biden administration, the United States is going to use its influence over the European Union more so than the Trump administration to pressure and punish Russia. So just to get to the end of this section here, Trump acquiesced in the invasion of Syria to attack the Kurds. The Europeans really didn't have much to say about that. the Europeans are upset with Turkey because his government is becoming more and more authoritarian. I haven't seen much reports about the Europeans being upset about how Turkey's treating the Kurds in Syria. Trump supported Brexit. Trump supported the unilateral approaches. But again, the view I'm seeing in the news reports today is that there's not as much difference between Trump and Biden substantively as people might expect. Again, the claim is that the Biden administration is following the same policies of the Trump administration, but the Biden administration is more polite. Even Angela Merkel said under Trump that the European Union could no longer completely rely on others, namely the United States. But even as Emmanuel Macron of France is calling again for developing a European Union security capability, independent security capability from NATO, or more autonomous at least, it's just the Germans don't respond. The Germans have never been enthusiastic about that, never. And I don't know if it's really going to change. It might change if Trump gets reelected in 2024. But if Biden gets reelected in 2024, they're not going to devote resources to this, I don't think. So we need to go to, what else do I have lined up here? Okay, so we need to go to our debate. And we have a debate question, pro and con. And I will let you choose if you want to be pro or con. So we go back to breakout rooms. And let me move into two groups and let you choose which one you want to join. So please join. This is pro. Sorry. And this is con. So please join pro or con based on your paragraphs that you wrote. Join pro or con on this debate question. And let me share the screen. So again, you see pro or con on this debate question. To South Koreans, the US is a threat or danger to world peace, and the European Union must develop the power capability to contain the United States. So you choose if you're pro or con. And let me go back to the breakout rooms. And so Kang Tong-un, are you pro or con?
I'm pro.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll put you in pro. So you're in pro. And I'll work with you pro as well, Kang Tong-un, because I don't want you to be alone. So please join that group, Kang Tong-un. Please join pro, and I'll join it as well so I can talk to you. So both sides will speak because there's only 3 students in the class, so everybody has a chance to speak. So you can read your paragraphs and develop your ideas and read them. And let me join pro. Okay, Kang Tong-un, what are you going to say?
Okay. I think partly pro because I don't think the US is a threat, but the EU must develop their power, I think.
Okay, so we're running a bit out of time because I forgot that I have to stop the Zoom at 10:30. So let me and so you and OWN Tech and UJE communicate with each other and decide what you're going to say. And Kang Tong-un will speak first because Pro always speaks first. Well, I think we just go ahead and start the debate. So Kang Tong, well, I mean, I think I need to let people get out of their groups because they might not be able to hear me. So 10 seconds. Okay, Kang Tong-un, please explain why you vote pro on whether or not on the fact that the U.S. is a danger to the world and the European Union must work to contain the United States.
Okay. I think I don't think the US is a threat danger, but I agree the EU must develop their power capability because they have a similar opinion about the foreign policy and they have a similar values, but I don't know, sorry, they have different values such as climate change and so on. So the EU must develop their power independently.
Okay, and Owen Tech, respond from the con position. Why is Kang Tong-un wrong?
Actually, I'll just leave my statement.
Okay.
What exactly is world peace? What are the conditions for world peace? First of all, suppose that world peace is a situation in which no national scale disrupts allies in all countries, entities, religions, and economies. If so, can the United States be said to be a threat to world peace in the current international community? In other words, is it one of the countries that cause various conflicts in the international community? It can be said that if the United States is currently in conflict with countries such as China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, and Syria in many areas, including politics and military economics. In addition, racism and economic problems in US have a great influence on the whole world. Then, yeah.
Well, Kang Tong-un, how can you disagree with that, Kang Tong-un? I mean, we all know the United States is making terrible mistakes. In Iraq, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and the United States destroyed Iraq and led to massive numbers of refugees coming into Europe. The United States invaded Afghanistan and failed. Of course, we know the United States is making terrible, terrible mistakes or catastrophes. How can you oppose Kang Tong-un? What's your response, Kang Tong-un?
Um,
Do you disagree with what Owen Tech said?
no, I agree with him.
You don't disagree. Who can disagree? You're right. But you might say it's not politically possible. It's not politically feasible. The Europeans can't choose to do what they cannot do. Thou shalt not overextend. If you overextend by trying to do something you cannot do, you will make the situation worse. Maybe it's a good idea, but that's all it is. It's a good idea. It's not politically feasible. And if you try to do what's politically feasible, you might undermine the progress you have achieved in European integration. Remember, Britain left the European Union. Most people did not expect that to happen. So the European integration is fragile. UJE, you also wrote Con. What did you write? UJE, turn on, unmute your microphone.
Okay. Oh. The United States is a threat because it broke out a trade war. So I think the United States had a hegemony constantly in danger to next neighbor country like China, our South Korea. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else?
No.
Yeah. Again, basically, she's saying United States is hegemonic. Europe cannot be hegemonic. European Union exists because of U.S. hegemony. U.S. makes European integration possible. European Union is a creation of American hegemony. That's a fact. That's just a political way it is. It is what it is. It is what it is. European Union is not a path to get us to heaven. The European Union is a way to keep us from hell. That's how they used to describe the United Nations, right? People have high expectations for the United Nations, but it can only do what it possibly can do politically. Okay, so I have to end the Zoom session. So, because I have to save this, so I'm going to end that.